on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It's so great to be here at Bateman's Bicycle Shop right here on Bathurst, an awesome small business in Toronto. They sell everything from mountain bikes, city bikes, and electric bikes as well. So today I'm glad to be joined by my friends and colleagues, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and MP Jean Yip. Canada's small businesses aren't small. I say that a lot when I'm on the road because it's true. Small businesses make up to 98% of all businesses in Canada. So their impact on our economy is incredible. Last week, our government released Budget 2024, our plan to create fairness for every generation. It's based on our belief that all Canadians should have a fair chance at succeeding and building a good life for them and their families. I have 2 kids, Kyle and Cassidy. My husband and I have taken many trail with our bikes on the road, and I really encourage everyone, since it's spring, to get out there. And this is a great place to start right here at Bateman's. My biggest hope in life, really, is to create a world where they can succeed. Our kids can succeed, to face less challenges and do better than my parents and even my generation. I believe that all parents across Canada share this wish for their kids. But today, too many young people doing as well as their parents or even better can sometimes feel completely out of reach. This is especially true for young Canadians, even when they have good jobs. Our budget lays out our plan to fix that. We will build a Canada that works better for you, no matter who you are or where you come from. And part of that promise is the chance to start your dream business and build your own future. Canada's small and medium-sized businesses are the drivers of our economy. As a former small business owner and entrepreneur myself, I know it's never been easy to start up and scale up your business. But it's so important that we create an environment where we can help make it easy as possible, an environment where businesses can thrive and reach their full potential. That's what our budget does. It lays out our plan to keep our commitment and launch the new Canada Carbon Rebate for small businesses. This means over $2.5 billion returning directly to small and medium-sized businesses, nearly 600,000 of them, and additional rebates every year going forward. It's a plan to help startups get off the ground and succeed by investing $200 million over 2 years to increase our access to venture capital, specifically for entrepreneurs from equity-deserving groups and those underserved communities who often struggle to access capital and meet those and get the need towards getting into the venture capital space. It is also a plan that invests $350 million over 5 years to Indigenous financial institutions to support Indigenous-owned small businesses. And we're going to introduce legislated procurement targets to leverage federal purchasing power to better support small businesses and innovators. Our budget is a plan to level the playing field for all entrepreneurs, and it builds on the work we've already done since 2015. We have strengthened and expanded the middle class. We have created millions of jobs for Canadians. We have created the first of its kind programs for equity-deserving groups, and I'm very proud of this. Our Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy, the Black Entrepreneurship Program, the 2S LGBTQI+ Entrepreneurship Program. But our work isn't over. We need to, and we want to, invest in the success for every generation. Whether success is finally being able to open the small business you've always dreamed about, I remember that feeling vividly, or it's turning the key to your very first home. Our government is here to help that make it a reality for Canadians. Because that is what Canadians have earned, and that is what Canadians deserve. I'd now like to turn it over to the Deputy Prime Minister to talk more about how our budget is going to support small businesses. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I am so glad to be here home in Toronto, in my own riding, in my own neighborhood, with 2 wonderful colleagues, Minister Rechie Valdez and my wonderful colleague, Jean Yip. I really want to say how much I appreciate the work of these two strong women, two strong mothers, part of an amazing GTA caucus. And I am really happy to be at Bateman's. This is my local bike shop. Robert, the guy who got this all going, his last name is Bateman, so that's a bit of a hint, told me he looked up my family's file as we were getting ready for this event, and he has personally tuned up some of my family's bikes and mine. So thanks a lot, Robert. And I wanted to come here because I wanted to come to a small business that, yeah, work here. You do a great job. Thank you very, very much. As you can see around me, these are people who are experts in bicycles and expert cyclists. What I really appreciate is how thoughtful and caring they are for people like me and my family who just want to have a good, sturdy bike that you can use to get around. And they provide really, really good advice and ongoing care to help us keep our family, ourselves, our bikes on the road. So thanks a lot. You do something really, really important for our neighborhood. Bateman's is such a great example of how small businesses are the heart of our economy. They're also the heart of our communities. And that's what I want to talk about today. We are living at a pivotal moment for millennials and Gen Z. These young Canadians have so much talent and so much potential. But today, too many young Canadians feel as though the deck is stacked against them. They can get a good job, they can work hard, but far too often, the reward of a middle-class life, a life that is secure, comfortable, prosperous, remains out of reach. Nous agissons aujourd'hui afin d'assurer une chance équitable pour chaque génération. Nous agissons dans le but de construire plus de logements plus rapidement. Nous réduisons le coût de la vie et nous encourageons le type de croissance économique qui permettra à chaque génération de Canadiennes et Canadiens d'atteindre son plein potentiel. Our country works best when our economy is growing and when there are opportunities for every generation. To drive the kind of growth that will deliver prosperity for Canadians and for everyone here at Bateman's, the budget I tabled on Tuesday redoubles our efforts to attract investment, increase productivity, boost innovation, and create good-paying, meaningful jobs. And that absolutely includes small business. You truly are the engine of our economy and the heart of our communities. That is no exaggeration. About 64% of Canadians work at small and medium-sized businesses. And we need to ensure that we are setting you up for success. That's why, with this budget, we're making it easier to start new businesses and to help existing businesses to grow. One way to do that is by delivering on our promise to return carbon pricing proceeds to small and medium-sized businesses. Our new Canada Carbon Rebate for small businesses will soon return over $2.5 billion directly to about 600,000 small and medium-sized businesses. For businesses in Ontario that are about the same size as Bateman's, that could mean a check of up to $7,000. That's real money. We're working hard to get the technical systems at the CRA set up as quickly as possible and are hopeful that checks can be delivered by the end of the year. And then, going forward, every year, eligible businesses will receive a check after they file their taxes. What's been important for us in setting up the new rebate for small businesses is to make it automatic. Eligible small and medium-sized businesses just need to file their taxes. The CRA will automatically assess you and send you a check. You don't have to apply for anything. It's a system designed to be fair and affordable while reducing the pollution that is causing climate change. And this new rebate is going to deliver real, meaningful support for businesses like Bateman's. We're also making Canada's tax system more fair by ensuring that the very wealthiest pay their fair share. In Canada and around the world, the 21st century winner-takes-all economy is making those at the very top richer, while too many middle-class Canadians are struggling just to avoid falling behind. The job of our tax system is to lean against this structural inequality, to fund investments in the middle class, especially in young Canadians, by asking those who are benefiting from the winner-takes-all economy to pay a little bit more. Today, our tax system doesn't do that. Today, it's possible for a carpenter or a nurse or a bike mechanic to pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multi-millionaire. That isn't fair. That's why we're supporting small businesses by increasing the lifetime capital gains exemption to $1.25 million. Currently, Canadians can exempt around $1 million in capital gains tax-free on the sale of small business shares, as well as farming and fishing property. Starting on June 25th this year, business owners with capital gains of up to $2.25 million will be better off under our new rules. That is going to help small businesses save money while increasing tax fairness at the same time. In that same spirit, we're creating a new Canadian Entrepreneurs Incentive. With this incentive, the inclusion rate will be reduced to 33.3% on a lifetime maximum of $2 million in eligible capital gains when it is fully rolled out. Entrepreneurs will then have a combined exemption of at least $3.25 million when selling all or part of a business. This will ensure Canadian entrepreneurs get to keep a bigger share of the profits from the risks they take and the hard work they do, and have more money to reinvest into their next venture. All of this is on top of our government's commitment to keep taxes on small businesses low. In fact, at an average combined federal-provincial rate of 11.6%, Canada has the lowest tax rate on small businesses in all of the G7. Parce que le Canada dépend des petites entreprises et des entrepreneuses et entrepreneurs pour avoir un avenir prospère et des emplois bien payés. Le succès du Canada dépend de votre succès. C'est pourquoi nous vous soutenons. Nous agissons dès maintenant. Sinon, ce sont surtout les jeunes qui paieront le coût de notre inaction et qui seront laissés pour compte. C'est une chose que nous ne pouvons pas faire et que nous ne ferons pas. Nous allons plutôt les aider à réaliser la promesse du Canada grâce à un plan économique responsable. Un plan qui permettra de créer de nouvelles possibilités de carrière et de faire croître l'économie au profit de chaque génération. There are some, like the conservative leader, who don't share our vision. He's already said he will not support our budget. He has said he will vote against financial support for small businesses, just like this one. He doesn't recognize the incredibly important role you play in our economy, in our communities, in our prosperity. He doesn't support making Canada's tax system more fair and making sure that the wealthiest pay their fair share. Because ultimately, he believes that the job of government is to do little, then less, and ultimately as close as possible to nothing at all. So let's be honest about what austerity and shrinking the state would mean for Canadians. It means you're on your own. And that is not the Canadian way. We take care of each other. Today, we say to our younger generations and to those who care about them, we are putting the power of government to work for you. Together, we will unlock the door to the middle class for more Canadians and renew the promise of our great country. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming. We'll now take questions from the media. If you could just come up to the microphone and state your name and news outlet, that would be much appreciated.
Good morning. Thanks for taking our questions. Kamal Karamali with CTV News. Minister Freeland, we've had countless economists and experts on our CTV News programs, including Question Period, talk about how this capital gains tax increase will not help small businesses, but will hurt startups and young entrepreneurs above all else. We've even spoken to individual small business owners who are against this. So trying to circle this square here, what metrics are you and your government specifically referring to in the capital tax gains being beneficial for small businesses? What specifically are you referring to when you say it's beneficial? Because obviously, you know, both sides are not seeing eye to eye here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. And I think it's important to start by focusing on what we are seeking to accomplish. Our view is it is so important to be sure that the promise of Canada, a middle-class life, is within reach for all Canadians, especially young Canadians, especially millennials and Gen Z. And we think it's just too hard right now. That's why this budget makes historic investments in housing, in affordability, in productivity and innovation, because we need economic growth. And we're doing it in a fiscally responsible way because we know that a fiscally responsible approach is really important for the business environment. It's important for people like Robert. It's also really important for younger Canadians. We can't just keep on putting debt on a credit card. So that means to make these absolutely essential investments, we're asking those who can afford it, those at the very top, to contribute a little bit more. That is fair, and that is how we're able to fund these really important investments in crucial areas like housing and infrastructure. Now, to your specific question on the capital gains tax and on small businesses and entrepreneurs, I think it's important to start by being really, really clear that the principal residence exemption is 100% there. So for every single Canadian, for the vast, vast majority of Canadians, their main asset is their home. We know that. And your home remains 100% free of any capital gains. The second thing important to bear in mind is for individuals, we've created a $250,000 tier. So as an individual, You only start paying a little more after your first $250,000 in capital gains every single year. For a couple, that means you can have $500,000 in capital gains year after year after year without paying anything more than you are today. And then specifically for small businesses, we have built into this program some specific incentives to help out small businesses. So the first is the lifetime capital gains exemption. Right now, that's $1 million, which is tax-free. We've increased that to $1.25 million. That's a substantial increase. The other thing that we've done is we've created an entirely new program that doesn't exist right now, will exist once this legislation is passed, called the Canadian Entrepreneurs Incentive. And what we're going to do is we're going to say the first $2 million of capital gains will be taxed at a lower rate than it is currently taxed. So when you stack those together, the lifetime capital gains exemption of $1.25 million, the $2 million Canadian Entrepreneurs incentive, the $250,000 every year, you have for the first $3.5 million in capital gains in a year, you are significantly better off than you are today. When you take everything into account, it is only entrepreneurs who are making a capital gain of more than $6.25 million in a year who will be paying a little bit more. And so that's why we are so confident that for the vast majority of Canadian entrepreneurs, for people who are just getting their start and need a little bit of an incentive to take that risk, this plan actually supports them. And that's something really important for us to do. The final thing I want to mention is the overall tax rate, the overall set of incentives for business investment. And in my remarks, I pointed out that the tax rate on small businesses in Canada is the lowest in the G7 by a very long way. The average combined federal provincial rate is 11.6%. That is a low rate. We are glad to have that low rate. And our government actually lowered taxes on small businesses. That was on purpose. We know that they are the engine of our economy and the heart of our community. The final thing that I'll mention, which is a metric that the Department of Finance looks at really, really carefully, and that is something called METR, the marginal effective tax rate. What it measures is what is the tax on each additional dollar invested in business, invested in the economy. We published a chart of this in the budget if you want to take a look. Canada's METR is and remains, after this budget, significant, by a significant measure, the lowest in the G7 and lower than the OECD average. We track that, we watch it, it's important. And then just the final thing, it's important to be clear about the details of what we're doing in the budget. And we are very clear that we are asking those at the very top to pay a little bit more. It's also important to be clear, why are we asking them to do it? And it's because we really recognize Canada needs some significant investments right now. We need investments in housing. We absolutely do. We need investments in housing enabling infrastructure. Those are in this budget. We need investments in affordability. We need our dental care program. We need to make contraceptives and diabetes medicine free. That's what we're doing in this budget. And we need some meaningful investments in economic growth, like the historic investment in AI, like the $5 billion investment in Canadian brains. Those are in the budget too. So all of this really is about making the investments that Canadians need in housing and other things, particularly for young Canadians, so they can work hard and build a middle-class life. And the way we're doing it is by asking those who can afford it, if we're talking about entrepreneurs, someone who is enjoying a capital gain of more than $6.25 million. So people who can afford it to pay a little bit more.
Thank you, Minister Freeland. I think what the critics, your critics, are sort of honing in on is why aren't there more measures in place to prevent some of these wealthiest who are seeing an increase in taxation, trickling it down to their employees. A lot of criticism is revolved around a lack of hiring and also driving up inflation. So why aren't there more measures in place to keep some of the wealthiest who are seeing an increase in taxation from passing it along to those below them?
Well, if the concern, I think you've articulated three concerns. One is about inflation, and that is something that I think we do need to be watching very closely and carefully. The good news is inflation in Canada for 3 months in a row has been within the Bank of Canada target range. 2.9 in January, 2.8 in February, 2.9 in March. That is significant progress. Our government absolutely recognizes the importance of supporting the Bank of Canada in the stabilization of inflation and, crucially, in creating conditions that would allow the bank to bring interest rates down. It was very important for me in that effort to maintain the three really specific fiscal anchors, which we laid out in the fall economic statement in the fall. And in this budget, we stuck to those three anchors. I was really glad to hear the governor of the Bank of Canada say on Friday that he recognized we had stuck to those anchors. He said in the fall that was important, that the anchors were important and were helping him. And he reiterated that on Friday. That was a central objective of mine. At the same time, we knew we had to make some big investments in Canada and Canadians. I haven't talked to a single person who would disagree with the idea that we need to make major investments in housing and housing enabling infrastructure, for example. So if you need to make those investments, you need to do it in a fiscally responsible way, precisely because you want inflation to be stabilized and rates to come down. Then you need to raise some revenues and ask those at the very top to pay a little bit more. So I am absolutely confident that our budget does precisely that, which I agree Canadians need. Now, when it comes to your second second part of your question, which was around employment and jobs, and we need that, I could not agree more. One of the things that I worried about the most when COVID hit was we had, right away, the deepest recession since the Great Depression, and millions of Canadians lost their jobs. That was heart-wrenching. That was potentially such a huge trauma for our country. And that's why our government stepped up. That's why we stepped up with huge support for small businesses, with huge support for the economy, because we were not going to allow the Canadian economy to be permanently scarred. And it worked. Canada now has 1.2 million more people working than we had before COVID. So I am very focused on jobs. This budget absolutely continues that focus. And by investing in housing, by investing in affordability, by investing in some of our major productivity investments, like AI, like the $5 billion in Canadian brains, we have a significant further investment in our SHRED program. The clean technology tax credits, that's more than $90 billion to attract investment in this essential transformation of our economy. That is all there. Those are investments in jobs, and those investments are working. Thanks.
Paz Lang, CBC. Premiers have written a letter to the federal government complaining about the budget and jurisdictional creep around issues like housing. What's your response to the idea that the federal government is becoming more involved in provincial affairs?
Well, you mentioned housing specifically, and I would point out, as the Prime Minister has, there was a moment last summer when the Prime Minister was asked about housing, and he said, look, I want to do a lot on housing, but this is, after all, a provincial and municipal jurisdiction. And I would say we heard back very, very clearly from Canadians, and actually very clearly from premiers and mayors, who said, federal government, you need to really step up. Housing is a national challenge, and the federal government needs to be leading the charge. What the Prime Minister said last summer was absolutely correct. The national response that we need the federal government to be there playing a leadership role, as the Prime Minister said a couple of days ago, was absolutely right too. And so we are leading the charge. I really believe housing is the central issue in the lives of, the vast majority of young Canadians. It is the central economic issue right now. If young people can't afford a home, that is a real constraint for Canadian businesses. So we absolutely recognize that we need to be there for housing. We are there for housing, and we are so keen to do that work in collaboration with provinces and municipalities. We're very keen to look at what provinces and municipalities are doing and to take some of the best examples and roll them out across the country. A really good example of that is BC Builds. That is something that the province of BC initiated. That is something that we said we chipped in on in the fall. We said that is a great program, and that is something we should be doing across the country. And that is why we launched it in this budget, Canada Builds. So there are some great, great examples of looking at best practice across the country and then rolling it out and making that possible in other provinces and territories. I'm actually very encouraged and really optimistic about where Canada is going on housing. I am seeing, and this has very much been catalyzed by the Housing Accelerator Fund, a real, I would say, generational change in Canadian attitudes towards housing. Of course, the federal government needs to invest in housing itself. We need to invest in housing enabling infrastructure. But above all, what we need is to be cutting the red tape, to be breaking through zoning barriers. And I see that happening across the country. I think we have now understood as a country that we need to cut red tape, that we need to embrace gentle density in our cities. We need to embrace it particularly close to major transit. We need supply, supply, supply. And in order to get that supply built, we need to create more places where people can build. And we're doing that. I mean, I think the important message is Canadians know this is the right thing, and I am now seeing across the country mayors, premiers responding to that need of Canadians, seeing that the federal government is there and is prepared to lead the charge and actually doing things differently. The final thing I'll say about collaboration between the federal government and the provinces is I am extremely optimistic that we're going to find a way on housing and on everything else to work together and to get things done. And that's because my own experience has been when there are big issues that really matter to Canadians, after all the sound and the fury, people are prepared to roll up their sleeves and find a win-win outcome for Canadians. And the example I'm going to give you is early learning and childcare. I remember in the 21 budget when we put forward a national plan for early learning and childcare, the initial response had the same kind of skeptical tone as your question is communicating. And a lot of people said, oh, it will never happen, good idea, but it's not going to be possible. One of the main concerns was, how will you ever get the provinces to play ball? I was confident it was something that Canadians wanted and needed, especially that Canadian mothers wanted and needed. When it comes to housing, I have not spoken to a single person in Canada who does not agree that this is a challenge of absolutely central importance, who doesn't agree that we need to act with absolute urgency. We need to do it first and foremost for young Canadians. And because it is so important, it is absolutely essential for the federal government to be there leading the charge. As the Prime Minister has said, that is what we are doing. We are so keen to do it collaboratively with provinces and municipalities. We're already making a huge amount of progress, and I have great confidence that's going to continue.
You've mentioned fiscal responsibility a few times this morning, but the deficit remains significant. Healthcare charges are being overwhelmed by debt servicing fees, and the debt, which is now over $1 trillion, will continue to grow. So how does that amount to fiscal responsibility?
Okay, I am grateful for the question because there are some areas where you can have a kind of legitimate ideological, even partisan debate. You can debate, do you want bigger government or smaller government? You can debate, is dental care a good idea or not? But it is simply a factual reality that Canada today is running a very fiscally responsible federal policy. We are working effectively to support the Bank of Canada in the effort to stabilize inflation and bring rates down, and that we heard from the Governor of the Bank of Canada on Friday, where he talked about how the fiscal track had not been affected and that we had met our 3 anchors, and that was important. Even more importantly, it's so important for Canadians, for Canadian analysts, for Canadian journalists, to take a look at the international comparisons. This week was the week of the IMF World Bank meetings. And I went to Washington very briefly. It's important for the finance minister to be there. And in particular, we're working hard, Canada is working hard on efforts to confiscate the assets of the Russian central bank to support Ukraine. So I was there just for a few hours in Washington this week. And I got there for a meeting of the Five Eyes finance ministers. And the Australian finance minister, who is a great guy, said hi to me. And he said, you're number 1 and we're number 2. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the IMF has just published its ranking of G20 countries and who is running the most fiscally responsible policy. Canada is number 1, Australia is number 2. So I really urge people to look at that data. And when I say repeatedly, as the Prime Minister has said, Canada has the lowest deficit to GDP ratio in the G7, that's not a partisan assertion. That is a fact. When I say we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio, that is not a partisan assertion. That is simply a fact. And on the debt to GDP, what was very important for me, and where this budget outperformed the fiscal anchors that we set for ourselves in the fall, we now have a debt to GDP ratio that is steadily declining. And that speaks to your point. That speaks to the sustainability of our fiscal position. It means that the size of our debt relative to the size of our economy is getting smaller every year. That's like paying down your mortgage. That is a very sustainable place for our country to be, and that is the right thing. And the final sort of international measure that I'm going to point you to is credit ratings. Now, the people who work at ratings agencies, they are not known as, extreme leftists or liberal partisans. These are, serious economic analysts, and they look and compare what is the fiscal position of different countries. Canada's AAA rating has been consistently reaffirmed. It doesn't get better than that. So I really think it's very important. Partisan people will say partisan things, but it is really important for Canadian journalists to be very aware of, what are those international objective markers of Canada's fiscal position. And our fiscal position is not just okay. We're not just fine. We are best in class in the G7 and in the G20. And I emphasize that because to me it's really important. It's important because I agree, you guys have been asking about inflation. I agree with that focus. A fiscally responsible policy is supportive of an effort to stabilize inflation and create conditions where interest rates can come down. Fiscal responsibility is important also because that is how we provide generational fairness, and that is how we support millennials and Gen Z by making the investments they need us to make right now, making investments in housing, in affordability, in economic growth. Everyone knows that Canada needs to make those investments. Our government recognizes we need to make those investments in a fiscally responsible way. And so we're doing it by asking those at the very top to pay a little bit more. I think that's the right thing to do.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to the people at Bateman's. Really appreciate it. I will. I did. I rode my bike here.